What can you gain by going through to do that hard thing? Doing that thing that you think you're not capable of. And so I think there's that mindset shift. And sometimes it's just one small step, like one small step in that direction. Because as we make small progress, it can give us confidence. Sometimes you just got to go do it and prove to yourself that you can. Enjoy the journey. We really only get one shot at it.
How do you fly in the face of fear? Today you're going to meet somebody who has done literally quite that. You've met fighter pilots on the podcast before, but this one has a very unique story in her experience, whether it's leadership, overcoming adversity, or handling the pressures of the home. This individual knows what it takes to manage her thoughts, feelings, and emotions under pressure in real life circumstances. Please welcome Kim Campbell. How are you today?
I'm good. Thanks so much for having me.
I wanted to introduce you as the human first before we get into the titles and the accolades and everything else. We know you're an award winner. We know you're a best-selling author, a mother, and so much more. But your background in the military, 20 plus years of service, thank you so much for all you've done. Could you help us understand what it means to be a fighter pilot?
That's a really good question. There's so much to it. I think I came up with this crazy dream at 10 years old that I wanted to be a fighter pilot. And I think at the time it was more about like this cool factor, the thrill of flight. For me, it was also on the path to becoming an astronaut, which was my ultimate goal. And then I went to the Air Force Academy, went on to pilot training, and started flying the A-10. And very quickly, 9/11 happened. We went to Afghanistan and Iraq. And all of a sudden, this idea of being a fighter pilot that I had as a young girl, it changed a little bit for me. I think, there still is always the cool factor. I think I still absolutely love that job, but I also think I really understood this mission and this purpose. And for me in flying the A-10, our primary role is to support the troops on the ground. And I found this purpose and passion and drive in that mission, and knowing that what I was doing was having a direct impact in helping these men and women on the ground get home safely to their families. So yes, there's this thrill, there's excitement, there's a little bit of like, I don't know, we'll call it cockiness because that does happen with fighter pilots. Like that, there's that piece of it, but there's so much more. It's a commitment to a mission, commitment to a purpose. And for me, I really found that in flying the A-10, and I never imagined that I would stay in the Air Force for 24 years, but it gave me such drive and motivation. I loved my job. And so I was just grateful for the opportunity to do it.
I had to look up the A-10 to understand the type of machine that it was. So this way I could ask more informed questions about it. I had the opportunity to interview F-16 pilot Michelle Kern as well. And I also got my single engine Cessna. I'm not comparing or even relating, just sharing some context about, why flying is super unique in my experience, just because of the courage that I personally had to cultivate to fly a plane. It scared the living daylights out of me. And I had a fear of heights and all these different things. I know that you wrote immense amounts of letters to the Air Force Academy for admission because initially you would face so much rejection. I don't even think I'm being light when I say that. I think I'm just being factual. And despite that rejection, you continue to write letters for admission to the point where you even show up on the day of, I guess, the first day that cadets were starting at the Air Force Academy, willing to still take that rejection to your face. How were you able to proceed mentally despite the rejection, despite the fear? What was it about all of the rejection and fear that it seemed like you turned it into fuel, if I'm not mistaken?
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. I think, hearing the word no is tough. I mean, seeing, everything that I had worked for as this, starting out as a young 10-year-old little girl up until high school was going to the Air Force Academy. I felt like for me, that was my first step to becoming a fighter pilot. And everything that I did, I mean, I shifted everything. I worked my butt off trying to get, into the Air Force Academy, and to get a rejection letter It was heartbreaking. I mean, it was devastating. Like, I remember feeling so defeated, like I had worked so hard for this and yet it still wasn't enough. And I think the thing that really helped me initially was having this incredible support team. My parents, my family, my friends, teachers, coaches, mentors. And then most importantly was my liaison officer. He was my connection to the Air Force Academy. He happened to be a classmate of my dad's from the Air Force Academy. And he was just, he was very matter of fact. He said, Kim, if this is what you want, then, send them a letter. Let them know that you're still interested and that, if a spot opens up, that you'll take it. I took his advice a little further and I wrote the Air Force Academy every week. And I just continued to work to improve. Once I finally got to the academy, that's definitely what I used as fire. I didn't want to just be average. I wanted to excel and prove that I belong there. And I went on to graduate #1 in the Military Order of Merit and ended up leading the cadet wing as the cadet wing commander in charge of all 4,000 cadets. I don't know if I had gotten my acceptance right away, would I still have had that drive? I hope so. But the reality is, I think you hear no, you face rejection, you face struggle, and you can do one of two things. I mean, you can quit or you can push through it. I mean, I struggled through pilot training with air sickness. I mean, I'm finally at pilot training in my dream of becoming a fighter pilot. And all of a sudden, I'm like, wait a second, I don't know if I'm cut out for this. It's that doubt. That fear of like, am I going to make it or am I going to fail? And I just pushed through. It was like, for me, every little setback, yeah, it was hard, really hard in some cases, but I think I just tried to use that as motivation of like, okay, if I can get through this, I can get through a lot of things.
I love how you ended that because so often people experience negative emotions and they don't know how to channel them into positive emotions. They don't know how to take that energy, if it's anger, and channel it into raw power. They don't know how to take that stress and channel it into extreme focus and activation energy. They don't know how to take anxiety and use it as a signal for where to point their attention for when this is like where they need to focus so they can relieve that anxiety. And so that reframing and turning it into, we'll just run with the metaphor of jet fuel, it it's a testament to how, like you even said, if you didn't have it, you don't know if you would have had that. If you didn't get that rejection, you don't know if you still would have had that same level of drive. And the irony of it, I see in the background you got some A10s on, for those that are watching on YouTube or on Spotify. Colonel Kim Campbell some has this awesome picture of a couple A10s in the background. I mean, I alluded to it before, and I've heard you talk about what a heavy machine it is. And like when I watch this thing, like in, I guess, through video, and I think back to my experience, I mean, it's a heavy machine. And I can imagine that when you have to fly it, that there's a certain amount of strength, poise, discipline that goes into it. Not just all the different elements that go into flying: meteorology, physiology, aerodynamics, all these different bits and pieces of information, the pressure that you're under, the gravity of a situation that you're experiencing in real time. Over 100 combat missions you've flown. You mentioned mission alignment. If you didn't have that clarity, do you think that you would have had that same drive to be a fighter pilot?
I think that clarity, like I said, it kind of came with time in terms of really understanding what I was doing and really understanding the purpose. But I think that drive, um, like the drive to be better, the drive to put in the work, the drive to go through those hard times really was because of that purpose. Like I had found this why, this very important reason for being, if you will. And I think, that's very similar to teams, right? I think it works for individuals and teams is that when you find a common purpose, you find like this passion and belief in what you do, it fuels everything. It makes putting in the hard times worth it. And I think there's something that you said a little bit earlier when you start to feel like the doubt, the anxiety, like maybe I'm not good enough, maybe I'm not ready for this. Like for me, that was always an indication to go back and put in the work. If I felt the doubt, that worry kind of creeping in, it was a little bit of a signal for me, go put in the work. I felt like the more prepared I was, the better I felt, the more confident I felt. And so it was about building competence, which then gave me confidence. That was all based on that drive, that motivation to be the best at what I was doing, not just for me, but for the troops on the ground and for my team as well. So anytime I felt like maybe I wasn't good enough or a little doubt or fear about what I was going to do. And this is for flying. This is really anything in life because I still feel those things now. It's a reminder, go put in the work. For me, it's preparation. It's doing, putting in the work. So seeking out lessons learned, learning from others, reading books. It's practicing. So actually putting in the work, whether that's rehearsals before I get on a stage for a keynote, whether that's flying and actually visualizing critical steps as if I was in the cockpit. Chair flying is something you might be familiar with, where we visualize what we're doing in the cockpit. So we prepare, we practice, and then for me, that final step before I go out and execute is planning for contingencies and thinking about the things that could go wrong on a mission a keynote, you name it, whatever it is, but thinking about things that could go wrong and not just what could go wrong, but what will I do in those situations? Once I've done that, it just gives me more confidence that I'm ready. I may not have thought through everything, but I've been close enough. And so that just gives me confidence to go out and do what I do because of the purpose, because of that passion for whether it's supporting troops on the ground or ensuring that, an audience feels connected with what I'm talking about. To me, that's what it's all about.
When it comes to, pilots deal with tons of preparation, right? Like there's to the point that it's like cemented into your brain, your ethos, your character. So when it comes to some people feel burned out from their work, overtrained, if you will. How have you managed burnout with all those reps? How have you managed the stress, the nervousness? We talked about preparation a bit as a strategy, but obviously people can over prepare and then as a result be mentally depleted, physically exhausted. How have you managed 20 plus years in the Air Force, over 100 combat missions flown? How have you managed burnout, stress, anxiety around that aspect of the job?
I think you got to be able to take a break. I believe in putting in the work and I believe in putting in the reps, but I also believe in taking a break. And sometimes you need that time to take a step back, reflect, kind of reconnect. Anytime after a deployment, and I did multiple deployments to Afghanistan and Iraq, and sometimes there wasn't a whole lot of time in between. But we always had 2 weeks when we got home, which isn't actually a lot of time, but to kind of just decompress, to reflect, to relax, and just take a break. Because sometimes right after 9/11, especially, we would take that break and we'd come back to the unit and we're spinning up for the next deployment. And it was just this continuous cycle. And so we had to take that break. Fighter pilots are also pretty good at letting off steam. We like to have a good time. A Friday night for us is, just a way to relax, get together, share stories. I'm a big believer in sharing stories. There's still a little bit of work in that because you're learning things while you're hearing those stories. But, hanging out in the bar on a Friday night, sharing stories over a beer, it was a way to kind of decompress. And sometimes, yeah, we poke fun at each other. We share funny stories, but it's a way for us to relax. And we did that without the beer in Afghanistan and Iraq as well, just trying to keep that mindset up. One of the things that was really, I guess, one of the things that stands out to me from our deployments was we would do movie nights. And everybody would gather around that wasn't flying. We're still flying combat missions, but we're just trying to bring everybody together. I think we were watching Band of Brothers. We would watch The Sopranos, you name it. But we would gather around and just try to relax. It's hard in a combat zone, but it was some way to just decompress a little bit. And I think that's something that's so important because it's really hard to just keep going. And I've learned the hard way. Sometimes me comes last when I'm dealing with kids in my job. And what I realized that wasn't effective. Because if I'm not taking care of myself, then I can't take care of the troops on the ground. Then I can't take care of my kids. And so I think sometimes it's just reframing that a little bit, that we've got to take care of ourselves too, because then we will be more effective, more resilient for our team, for our family.
It's the counterintuitive nature of things. Obviously, people can, rest too long and go too hard, right? Like, depending on which side of the spectrum. But like when it comes to running or when it comes to training at a high level, you have to run slow so you could eventually run fast. And like, you can't run set. I mean, you can run 7 days a week depending on who you are, I guess, right? But most of us can't like train 7 days a week. The joints get taxed, the ligaments can't heal, the tendons suffer, you end up with overuse injuries. And it's the same metaphor in life. And it sounds like performance when it comes to the highest performers in the Air Force. And, speaking of like one of 1%, I mean, at the time you served, female fighter pilots were less than 1% of all fighter pilots. I believe when Michelle served, they were about 2%. So,
Yeah, we're at
there
about
wa-
3% right now, so we're
okay.
slowly creeping up.
every 2 years or so, I get. When I
Yeah,
interviewed Michelle a couple years ago, I think she said that the numbers were also going up. I've heard you speak in the past about how the numbers were going up, but like it's
very slow.
unfortunately, it's very slow.
Yeah.
What do you feel or what do you believe in terms of I'm trying to figure out how to ask this gently. In terms of maintaining that responsibility of being that one of 1%, what, if any, responsibility did you feel being a female fighter pilot?
Oh, I put a ton of pressure on myself. I knew that going into my fighter squadron that I was gonna be the only female pilot. And I think I had this pressure, I don't think it came from anywhere but myself, of walking in and knowing that if I made a mistake or if I failed in any way, that it was the pressure that I would ruin it for women that came after me, And so, good or bad, right? That pressure, I guess I used it as fuel as well. For me, it was just, okay, if that pressure's there, then put in the work. And I spent a lot of time studying. I was in the vault. I was talking to other pilots, seeking out our best pilots, the weapons officers in the squadron, and learning tactics from them. It was a lot easier, I guess, in some ways at the time. I was married. My husband was also an A-10 pilot, but we had no kids, and so I spent a lot of my time at the squadron and really putting in the effort and really driving towards being the best that I possibly could in the airplane. And, the reality was the guys in the squadron really, I don't think they cared. These were like some of my classmates from the Air Force Academy. My husband was friends with some of these pilots. I think there was a lot of question about what it would be like with me in the squadron, but I think what they realized is that I could fly the airplane just as well as they could, if not better in some cases. But, then we deployed to combat to Afghanistan and Iraq. I proved myself very early on in my career, and the reality was the guys didn't really care. I mean, they just cared that I was credible and capable in the airplane. That was what was most important. And so it was just being credible and capable. I think more than anything, that's what allowed me to succeed in the long run.
Credible, capable, to your earlier point, competent. I think that a lot of people that struggle with that sense of imposter syndrome lose sight of the objective lens that they have to put on themselves. And there's one exercise framework that I offer when it comes to this. It's called the evidence frame, where effectively you list out all the different things that give you credibility to stand up in a given moment. So, for me as an SVU prosecutor standing up in court, and I feel like there's someone who went to an Ivy League school standing across the aisle. For me, it's an adversary that's extremely capable, and maybe the facts are in their favor. I'm not feeling like the right person, to go up and represent the people of Bronx County in this particular moment. So what can I do? I got to start listing out all the things that give me credibility to stand up in this moment without it taking away from how I can take care of the case. My supervisors count on me. I interviewed the witnesses. I passed the bar. Like, I just start listing all these different things to help create an objective lens. I prepared the cross. I went through it. I practiced in the mirror, just like listing all these different things that helped me establish, like, all right, if I remove my ego and I just focus on what's factually true, there's a chance that I won't make this about me and I can make this about the case and actually serve the actual end. So I think that credibility, that lens of credibility is super important. And, I'm curious when it comes to like your perspective of how you've handled, like, if you ever have dealt with any sense of imposter syndrome. There's a lot of proof under your belt in terms of who you are. I'm sure you obviously know who you are. the titles, the accolades, the actual performance, all of it reflects it. How have you, if you do deal with imposter syndrome, how do you manage it? If you have dealt with imposter syndrome, how have you managed it?
Anytime you start something new, there's always this doubt of like, do I fit in? Am I going to belong here? And I think, I guess one of the good or bad things with the military is that you're moving every few years. It's not that you're starting over because your reputation does kind of, it goes with you. People know how you've performed in the past. But I think there's always that little bit of, well, at least for me, there's a little bit of doubt. There's a little bit of like, are these guys going to accept me the same way my previous squadron? I've been in units with very high performers, weapons school, which is our version of Top Gun. You're always kind of like, do I have what it takes? It's there, but I think also it's like you said, I go back to, yeah, they have some pretty impressive qualities. I hope I can learn from them, but I've also put in the work. Like I've done my part. And I think that for me is always just, I go back to that. Anytime I'm having a little bit of doubt, it's like, nope, it's a reminder. I've done the work. I've had my combat deployments. I study, I chair fly, I do all of these things so that I am ready, I am capable, and I can go out and perform and, do the mission. So I think there's always going to be that little bit of doubt for me. Every time I do something new or push myself, get outside my comfort zone, stand on a stage in front of, thousands of people. And, you always have that little bit of like, I want to do this right. Like, I hope I do this well, but it's a reflection of what you said. You kind of reflect on all the things that you did to get you there. And it gives me that confidence of like, all right, let's do it.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Inside the Inspired. My name is Jonathan Cohen, and I have a quick favor to ask you. If you're getting any value out of this content, please take a second to subscribe to the channel. You help us reach more people, and you can also stay up to date with all the latest content coming your way. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'll catch you in the episode.
You can hear the growth mindset in everything that you're talking about, whether it's who can I learn from and how. So looking at the right mentors, you mentioned the support system earlier also when it comes to how you manage stress and burnout. Human connection was a big part of that. And then also flying the airplane, like putting all those hours in the simulator, visualizing, actually in the aircraft itself. I want to divert to this one story that you share about an experience where you almost crash landed over Baghdad. If you could share with the audience that story very quickly, I have a couple follow-up questions. Oh, not very quickly, on your own, at your own cadence, if you will. I'm sorry.
I'll give you the shorter version.
What that experience was like and how, if at all, it's affected your mindset or performance since.
It's definitely affected my mindset, my life since. But this was back in 2003. This was my second deployment. My first deployment was to Afghanistan in 2002. So this is Iraq 2003. And I was still a young wingman in my unit, relatively new to the squadron. But the good side of that is they paired us up. So we had a very experienced flight lead with us, flying with a less experienced wingman. And at this point in the conflict, our troops had reached Baghdad. And so our role as A-10 pilots was to support them. So we would take off from Kuwait, we'd fly up to Baghdad, we'd air refuel, so get gas while airborne. And then we would just wait until someone had a call that they needed close air support. And unfortunately, this day, the weather wasn't great, which is a little bit non-standard. So there were clouds over Baghdad, and we were just hoping that we could make a difference and an impact for us. We had to be able to get below the weather if we were going to support the troops. And then out of nowhere, we get this call that there are some ground troops taking fire. They need immediate assistance. And this is kind of that moment of like, okay, this is what we train for. This is what we plan for. And my flight lead immediate is like, we're going to find a hole in the clouds. We are going to get down there and support them. We find our way over the target area. We get the kind of a little bit of a talk on description of what's happening below the weather. And it turns out our guys are on the west side of the Tigris River. They're hunkered down, awaiting resupply. And then the enemy's on the east side of the river. They're firing rocket-propelled grenades into our troops. So we're given a target to strike. we find that hole in the clouds. And I remember just being like watching my flight lead, and he's just like rolls inverted and he's gone. And he disappears through the clouds, to get down below the weather. And I'm above the clouds and I am alone. And I'm kind of alone for, it's a few seconds, but kind of that deep breath of like, okay, I hope I can do this. Like, let's do this right. And he says, Casey, it's my call sign. He says, you can, get down below the weather. I find that hole in the clouds and kind of take that deep breath and just dive through. As soon as I popped out down below the weather, I could see the firefight. I mean, we were lower than we normally are. I could see tracers and smoke. It was kind of surreal. I mean, it's everything we talk about it and everything that we plan for it, but to see it and to see this firefight was really eye-opening. We did a couple passes, and then as we were down there below the weather, we started to see these like puffs of gray and white smoke and bright flashes in the air. And that there's the realization that not only is there this firefight happening on the ground, but they're also shooting up at us too. So we do this couple passes, decide it's time to climb up to get altitude and airspeed back. And as I'm coming off target, trying to climb up, I just feel this huge explosion at the back of the airplane. There's this like bright red-orange fireball. And there's no doubt in my mind, immediately know that I've been hit. I mean, the jet just completely noses over. I start seeing Baghdad below. This is where time slows down. Like I can see the ground getting closer. And I think just basic, my instinct was to pull back on the control stick as I'm diving at the ground. And I pull back on the control stick and nothing happened. Like nothing. That was my first indication of, oh, this is really not good. Like this is not what is supposed to be happening. And so at that point, I completely fall back on my training. It's, analyze the situation, figure out what's going on. I've got master caution lights, whole panels lit up. Very quickly, I see that I have completely lost all hydraulics on the airplane, which is how we fly the airplane. And so at this point, I know I can eject, which isn't really a good choice at all. Thankfully, the A-10 has another option other than ejection, which is an emergency backup system. And it's a simple switch. But I flipped that switch, and now the jet is able to fly on cranks and cables. So now I pull back on the stick, and it's heavy, but it's pulling away from the ground. And that was kind of the first moment that I thought, all right, I might actually make it out of here alive. And now I'm over Baghdad. My airplane is, it's hanging on, but it's damaged. And I've got an hour to fly home and kind of figure out what's next. Thankfully, I was not alone. I had a flight lead, my wingman with me, providing that mutual support. And, we flew that airplane the 300 miles back. He was on my wing. I say we, but I was the only one in the airplane. And then made the really difficult decision of, do I get this jet back to friendly territory and eject, or do I try to land the airplane? Long story short, I made the decision to land the airplane. Was able to get it back on the ground in Kuwait. Probably the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. And incredibly grateful and thankful to be alive, to be able to share the story.
Hearing a near-death experience, every single day, I do my best to name things that I'm grateful for, so I don't take a second of life for granted. And then you hear something like this, and like, I'm so grateful that you can share this story, that you survived to share this story, to teach these lessons, share your insight, your wisdom, and know what courage looks like in real time, why preparation matters, and to see the real-time benefits of it, not only to support the troops on the ground, but to take fire and to make a decision, handle the pressure, and live to tell the tale. Was it a belly landing or a wheel? I know that the A-10 can land on its belly.
It can, but thankfully we have another procedure for emergency gear extension, which I used that one. And I remember as we came back into friendly territory, trying to get the airplane configured to get the gear down, and just you pull this handle and you just wait, and it's slowly the air, the wheels are coming out in the slipstream, if you will, and they've got to lock into place, and just like slowly counting all right, there's one green light. There's the next green light, just waiting in anticipation to get those 3 green lights telling me the gear were down and locked. So thankfully everything worked like it was supposed to. All the people behind the scenes that made sure that jet could fly under any circumstances. It was a true team effort to get me home safely.
And if I'm not mistaken, you were the second person to ever land an A10 in an emergency situation like that?
Yeah, in that manual reversion system, there were 3 attempts during Desert Storm. Only one of them was successful. And so, yeah, I mean, I knew about those stories though. I remembered them. I read this book when I was a young wingman about flying the A-10 in Desert Storm, and I knew about the stories. So the whole way, as I'm making my way back, I remember the stories of the pilots who came before me and the ones that didn't make it, and that's the power of sharing stories, right? That's why we have to be a little bit vulnerable and put those stories out there, even when it feels uncomfortable, because those stories can help others on their journey.
Despite the evidence to the contrary that it was, I'm going to say it in what sounds like not a wise decision to do that. Was it courage? Was it intuition? Was it training? What led you to make that call in that moment on your second combat mission to do something that had only ever been done successfully one time based on what you came across?
It's probably like my 10th combat mission, so really close to that. I don't know. It wasn't hadn't had very many. It was a lot of things. I think one, it was the training and preparation that had gone into doing this. I mean, the reality is we don't train very often in manual reversion. We just do it once during our initial training. So there was that. I think the other factor weighing on my mind is that I always knew that I could eject at the last second. Like there was always that last ditch. If I needed it, I could eject. I had also at one point early in my career signed a waiver based on my body weight. Many women had to sign it because of the lower body weight, that if you ejected, you would be at increased risk for flailing injuries. So I knew like ejection was not, I mean, I felt very confident in our ejection seat. Let me get that straight. But I also knew that, there's risk in everything. I got to fly the jet for an hour. I had a very experienced flight lead with me who, I mean, he said, KC, this is your decision. It's a single seat fighter. It's your decision, and I will back you up. I mean, that was huge, right? For him to show that confidence in me and my confidence in me as a pilot. And the reality is, I think I just, I thought through it all. We talked about it all. I weighed pros and cons. I understood the risk, but I just kind of had this like gut feeling that I could land the airplane. People can Monday morning quarterback all they want. That's fine. Like until you're in that situation, like you just make the best decision you can with the information you have. And I made the decision and I felt confident and, grateful and thankful to be alive.
I love hearing that. So am I. Like for you, it's crazy to see how someone who bet on themselves to such a degree, to the point that despite their ejection, despite the air sickness, despite all of these factors that were quite literally fighting against you, and then put you in this position where it might have all been validated, you continue to fight against it and live to share your story and inspire thousands and thousands and thousands of people around the world.
Kind of puts life into perspective a little bit, right? Like, I guess the blessing of it all is that this happened very early in my career, very early in my marriage. And I think you look at life a little differently when something like that happens. Came home from that deployment, and my husband and I had some very real conversations, very early in our marriage about what was important to us and where, what we wanted to prioritize. I think it just really put things into perspective for me. Also gave me some credibility in combat, that I think really set the stage for the rest of my career. Like, gone were the discussions of whether or not women could fly. I'd never really, like, it gave me confidence as well. Like, I could do things that I didn't think I was capable of doing. If you would have told me that as a, teenager or even as a young lieutenant that someday I would fly a mission over Baghdad, get hit with a missile, fly in manual reversion and land a heavily damaged airplane, I would have like laughed at you, But I think that's the reality, is that sometimes we underestimate what we're capable of doing.
Do you think maybe I want to ask this in a way that's value driven for the audience. But people that are struggling with those limiting beliefs, it's easy to say after the fact, right? Like you add all this confident, like all this confidence about like, hey, like look at what I am capable of. You surprise yourself. And then it's like, well, where else can I break these limiting beliefs? Maybe people are struggling with limiting beliefs in their life about what's possible. How can they break those limiting beliefs?
I think you gotta do the work. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. I think there are doubts, there are worries and fears and everything that we do when it's hard, when it's outside of our comfort zone. So you gotta put in the work. But I also think sometimes we limit ourselves and we don't think about what's on the other side of that. Like, what can you gain by going through to do that hard thing? Doing that thing that you think you're not capable of. And so I think there's that mindset shift. And sometimes it's just one small step, like one small step in that direction. We don't have to take the giant leap. I mean, eventually we do. But, if it's one small step and just small progress, sometimes that can make all the difference because as we make small progress, it can give us confidence. Sometimes you just got to go do it and prove to yourself that you can. And if you don't succeed on that first attempt, then learn the lessons from it. I mean, that's, I think, part of the thing. Sometimes we set ourselves up like we have to be perfect. We have to get it right the first time. And the reality is, so many times, like, you can hit the wall, you can hear no, you can face rejection, but every one of those times you should be doing a little bit of a debrief of what you learned and what you can do differently the next time so that you can succeed.
When it comes to, I mean, all of this experience has made you a tough person. Sounds like you were a tough person before that. How have you come to define toughness based on your experience?
That's a good question. I think there were things in life that helped me become tough or tougher. I think back to these early days in high school and my dad questioning whether I had the mental toughness to go to the Air Force Academy. My dad was an Air Force Academy grad. When he was there weren't any women. I told him I wanted to go. I'm not sure he believed me. And then all of a sudden he was like watching me put in all this work, but he's still, he was seeing me physically get ready to be tough from a physical perspective, but he always kind of wondered, like, did I have mentally what it takes, right? Like sometimes that mind quits before the body. And so he was, kind of that was in his mind. And then my, I guess maybe my junior, or senior year in high school, I ran cross country. And on one of the races, I think cross country, the finals and the county finals or something like that. And the start of a race, everybody's all packed in, you're all tight in there together, and the gun goes off and everybody's racing to kind of get out front, jockey for position. And one of the other runners accidentally stepped on the back of my shoe and it came off. And I kind of had this half second of like, well, shoot, do I stop and put my shoe on and then I'm going to be at the back of the pack, or do I just run without the shoe? I mean, it wasn't that long, right? And so I just decided to keep running. I realized, after about a mile of running on first pavement and then rocky hills, may not have been the best decision because my foot hurt pretty bad. And I wasn't, I'm not running at the same speed that I would with a shoe. But at that point, I already committed to it. I couldn't go back. So I just kept running. And I finished the race, had a pretty bloody foot, blistered to deal with. But in that moment, my dad was like, oh, turns out she does have the mental toughness to do it. So I think, to me, toughness is like the ability to do hard things, even when you don't think that you're capable of doing it, right? It doesn't have to be anything. I mean, this was just a cross country race, right? Like it's not, it doesn't have to be big things. It can be little things. But I think it's mental and physical toughness. Those are two very key qualities.
I love how you leverage the inexperience or that lack of belief to still give yourself enough credit to say, I'm going to do this thing anyway, even when the odds are not in my favor. It's so important for people to understand this concept because life is going to work against you. Things are not set up to prime you for an opportunity. That's what makes it worth it. I mean, you're telling the story. After everything that you've been through, you're telling a story about a cross country race in high school to help demonstrate the idea that you were giving yourself proof and you were showing yourself in real time how you can endure, how you can handle things. Now, the irony of what I've come to define toughness or resilience as is not running with a pebble in your shoe if you don't have to.
That's a
It's
really good point.
you you can still do it and it will still make you tough as long as it's at like I mean based on circumstance, right? Like keep running is the point. And you're talking to a runner so it resonates even more like it and my next marathon if my shoe comes off like I'm trying to hit sub 3 so I might have to stop to put my shoe back on my foot so this way I can keep running at a high clip. But
Yeah, I mean, if I had to do it all over again, putting the shoe back on and then, like, sprinting, might after might have been the better
but
decision, but.
the lesson is there. And speaking of lessons, I got a couple more questions for you. I appreciate your time very, very much. I know the audience does too. 20 plus years in the Air Force. Leadership is obviously a big part of your expertise and background. You were a leader and is it Air Force Academy professor? There's the Air Force Leadership and Values. I don't wanna get this wrong.
No, that's okay, it's a very long title. I did teach at the Air Force Academy for a couple years, but my final job was at the Center for Character and Leadership Development, and I was the director there. Yeah.
So based on that experience, my question is very specific to the point that I wrote it down. If someone comes to you and shares that they're dealing with a toxic work culture and you're looking to scale that leadership, how do you shift out of a toxic culture that's maybe filled with burnout, bereavement, lack of recognition? How can a leader or how can anyone in a company that's dealing with that type of toxic work culture start to make that shift to change that culture?
Yeah, and that's so tough. I mean, I've seen it before, I've dealt with it before, and if we're talking it's at the senior leader level, anything that the mid-level leaders or managers can do to kind of shield that, which then puts a lot of pressure on those leaders and managers. So one, kind of shielding the people below them from that as best they can. And then finding ways to speak up about it. Providing suggestions. Sometimes that can be hard, especially when you're worried about job security and things like that. And so again, small steps, small things that you can do, but providing those suggestions with solutions or problems with solutions about how we can do things differently, some changes that we can make. It's really hard though when the leader that is toxic isn't receptive. I have seen in cases where if it's bad enough, you go around to the leader above them, because yes, there is risk in that, but if that's what's good for the team. So it's very situation dependent. I think the most important thing that we can do, not just as leaders, but team members, is try to build trust and connection with the people on our team so we can have that open environment and have those tough conversations. I will tell you that one of the hardest things I've done in my career in the Air Force was removing one of my leaders from command because it was a toxic environment. And it's hard to remove someone, right? It's hard to make that decision to take someone out of that position. But I think, again, in my gut, I knew it was the right decision because this was for the good of the team. The reality is, if you're a leader and you're dealing with that situation, you have to be able to make the tough calls and take people out of the team that aren't for the benefit of the team. Sometimes we feel like we don't want to hurt somebody's feelings or we don't want to hurt somebody's career. But the reality is you're hurting the rest of the team if you leave people like that in place. So that's a big question because there's so many pieces and parts to it. But I think we're unfortunately seeing a little bit more of it in a lot of different cultures or in a lot of different industries. It's that kind of that toxic work environment. And it's unhealthy and, it leads to burnout, it leads to stress, it leads to people leaving an organization. And so having the courage to speak up, to provide some alternative solutions. Sometimes leaders don't know if they're not given feedback. And so that's sometimes when you're having that doubt and worry about, do you bring something up? I think if you want somebody to change, this goes up and down the chain. But if you want somebody to change, you have to provide them feedback and give them the opportunity to change. Much harder when you're giving that feedback up the leadership chain.
You've offered so much today in the form of experience, wisdom, and insight. I'm like gonna have to listen to this more than twice, I feel like. Not just in the post-production, but again, because reflecting on everything that you had to offer today, I mean, I know that you cover more of it in your book, a lot of these actionable insights. How can people keep up with your journey? Where can they find the book?
The book Flying in the Face of Fear is available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. You can order it from your favorite local bookseller as well. You can reach out to me on social media. I'm sure we talked about a lot of things, but if there's a question that somebody has that is listening, and please feel free to reach out. LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, it's all there. So yeah, reach out and let me know. I'm always happy to answer those questions.
And you can also listen to it on Spotify. Let's not forget that.
Absolutely.
The last question that I have for you that I pose to all the guests that come on the podcast, I'm now going to offer you. If the future version of yourself from 10 years from now were to fly in and offer you some advice in order to get there, what do you think she would say to you?
Enjoy the journey. I think, I turned 50 this year. It's kind of that, eye-opening age, at least for me, it was. And I just realized how important it is. Like, we work so hard. We put so much effort into what we do, for that purpose, that drive, that mission. But I think it's so important to enjoy the journey along the way too. Spend time with people that are important to you. Always be willing to learn and grow and take time out to decompress. And spend time with family and your friends, the people that are important to you who make a difference in your life. But I think that's what I hope that I will do over these next 10 years is enjoy the journey. We really only get one shot at it.
Thank you so much for the time today. This was really a blast. Ladies and gentlemen, Colonel Kim KC Killer Chick Campbell.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.